we're going to get started.
Great.
Close my office door, and let me welcome everyone to the LCRN Life Course Research Network webinar series on measurement that we have been doing, and this is funded by our Maternal and Child Health Bureau. I'm Neil Halpin, and I'm the director of the UCLA Center for Healthier Children, Families, and Communities, professor here in the Department of Pediatrics, also in the School of Public Health and in the Public Policy School here at UCLA. Today I'm co-hosting our webinar and Measuring Health Development of Children and Youth with Kimberly Schonert-Reichl, who is director of the Human Early Learning Partnership. In our last series of webinars, we were exploring how the EDI has been implemented in cities throughout the U.S. And also, the previous webinars, we looked at how the EDI was being implemented in Canada. And we had presentations from folks both in Ottawa and also from British Columbia that were joining us on those. Today, our webinar will provide us background on the Middle Years Development Instrument, or MDI, and its utility, including examples of the ways that educators and communities have used the MDI data to make positive changes for children in schools and in communities. Just a few quick technical comments before we begin. During the presentation, all participants will be muted, but as a precaution, please be sure that you're in your phone or microphone is in mute mode. Following the presentation, we will follow up with a discussion. There's a raise your hand function on the screen, and you can raise your hand and submit a question through the chat function as well. What Kim and I have talked about is that she's going to present for about 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. And so when we have till 2:30 Pacific time, so about an hour and a half. So hopefully that'll lend plenty of time for discussion. So let me turn it over to Kim, and I'll let you just take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here, and really an honor to be a part of this series and to share with all the audience more information about the MDI. You know, it sounds like they've spent a lot of time talking about the EDI and now talking about middle childhood. And just as far as back is just a little bit of background. I am the director of the Human Early Learning Partnership at UBC, as Neil mentioned. I'm also a faculty member in the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia, a professor in the Human Development, Learning, and Culture program. And also, I have to also mention I'm a former teacher. So and from Chicago. So even though I'm in Canada now, I'm actually very familiar with the U.S. landscape and teaching and working in community. So just to give a bit of that context, and please, you know, I'm used to giving a presentation where people ask me questions throughout. So if you have a burning question, just like jot it down so that we'll make sure. So I'll go for about 45 minutes. We'll see, and then, and of course, share all my slides with anybody who's interested. So I'm going to be talking about measuring the health and development of children and youth, the MDI, or Middle Years Development Instrument. I'm going to talk a little bit about our center here, that HELP, and then of course give you some background and description about the MDI, as well as the context in which why we have the MDI data now, why we think measuring these things are important right now in this place and time. So you're going to learn about the development and the implementation of MDI, how people use their MDI data and how they can bring it back to stakeholders. At UBC, I'm a director of an interdisciplinary research institute on child well-being at UBC, where our vision is all children thriving in healthy societies. We also I just do want to make note, because so much of our work is not just about collecting data and doing, reports, peer-refereed journal articles. It's really about working directly with community members. And part of, from a Canadian perspective, is our Indigenous population is so important. So we do have an Aboriginal steering committee we've had at HELP for 15 years who advise us on all of our reporting and everything we do, actually. So I just want to say a big thanks, shout out to them. At HELP, we take if anyone knows Yuri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model of human development, of influence, and just looking at children in context, the spheres of influence, what are the differences that make a difference, and a focus on both risk and resiliency, really taking this idea. But this will give you the context of what we're looking at with the MDI, as well as all of our tools. HELP's child monitoring system. We actually are collecting data across the life course, starting with development of the toddler development instrument, which is something Dr. Martin Goon is working on right now in pilot, the childhood experiences questionnaire, which parents complete when children enter kindergarten, the EDI. Sounds like many people have heard a lot about the early development instrument. And then the MDI, which is right now we use in grades 4 and 7. Other jurisdictions use them in between ages, actually all the way to 4 to grade 12. But this is really during this middle childhood. And just so you know, and Neil, I don't know how much I've even told you, is that we are in development of the Youth Development Instrument, or YDI, which is going to be at age 15 in 10th grade. And we're just in the process of developing that. So, and we'll soon pilot it as well. And just so you know, at HELP, we do link all of these data to one another. So we actually obtain students' personal education number, and we're able to link their data from their EDI to their MDI, and then also to health data and to educational data. And just to give you a bit of the perspective, is we're now the first cohort of students who completed the MDI graduated from high school last year. So we're hoping now to start linking data to post-secondary and on and on. So our wish list is long, let me just say. So why now do we need to be thinking about middle childhood, well-being, child health? We know that there are a number of risk factors that are emerging for children during the middle childhood years. There's bullying, concerns about sleep. There's actually some data reporting decreases in empathy in this cohort of individuals, especially from since the 70s. There's some research now showing a significant decline in empathy among our young people. There's, of course, increased concerns about mental illness. I'm not sure if it's increased concerns, but again, growing concerns about mental illness, and then toxic stress, and this notion of us learning so much more about the biology of stress and the way it can affect the brain, and how context influence brain development. Just to double click a bit on this, it's interesting because at MDI, we do collect data on sleep, this idea of this great sleep recession, it's being called, and this idea that we're seeing much less sleep in adolescence and children, middle childhood across the last 20 years, in courts of social media, increased anxiety, interferes with sleep, and it's associated with increasing rates of obesity, and things like that. And also I do want to say, because the MDI really focuses on children's lives inside and outside of school, to really talk about the importance of out of school time. And I think many of my friends in the US know how important out of school time. There's been such a increased attention to the critical, these critical hours. But we know that children who spend quality after school time, it not only improves their well-being, but also their school success. So I just really want to emphasize the out-of-school hours for kids. So what now do we need to do? What we've really seen, our focus on well-being, which is a bit different than the EDI, which is focused on vulnerability or ill-being. So we've really seen in recent years a real paradigm shift that's focusing on not just decreasing illness, but really to promoting health and well-being, and this idea of not just, and it really came, actually, in some ways, there's probably been multiple roads that have led to this shift. One I'll bring up from psychology is the positive psychology movement that began around 2000 with Mike Csikszentmihalyi and Marty Seligman, who really talked about this whole field of positive psychology, where we focused for decades on how to help with depression and anxiety, and knew so little about joy and optimism and hope and how and life satisfaction. And so this really led to a shift of our lens in which we begin not just thinking about ill-being. And I always think back to when I was in graduate school, when we were going to measure well-being. The truth here is that we would just use a measure of psychopathology and say, if you were low on it, you were doing well. So we've really shifted now with many measures, and really moving away from a solely focus on intervention, where we wait till, this is a great metaphor from one of my students, the life preserver, where we wait till the kids fall in the water and we preserver out to pull them up with an intervention, to really one prevention. We've really learned so much in the last decade or two about equipping children with the skills and tools that they can equip them with the life vest, to when they hit the rocky waters, they can stay afloat, and that resiliency aspect of prevention. A lot of my work over the last couple of decades is focused on an area called social and emotional learning, which is growing across the world. It's a movement in schools across the US, but really across the world. And this idea really sparked in part by Daniel Goleman when he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence, but really finding that your social emotional skills are even a better predictor of your life success than his academic achievement. Things like being able to manage your emotions and get along with others and resolve conflicts seem to be very important. And CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, is what my friend Mark Greenberg calls the mothership of SEL. It's in Chicago. And just as a note, they are having a conference, the first ever CASEL or SEL conference in Chicago in October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So if you want more, go look at their website, but it'll be quite a large thing. And this is just their framework for social and emotional learning. And I'm just mentioning this because it'll foreshadow kind of some of the things we measure on the MDI. So CASEL has identified these 5 dimensions of social and emotional learning: self-awareness, awareness of your strengths and weaknesses, managing your emotions, self-management, social awareness, including empathy and perspective taking, relationship skills, being able to have positive peer relationships, and then responsible decision making. I'm not going to go a lot into this. I just want to mention some of this. I could do a whole section just on SEL. In developing the MDI, we really drew a lot from the literature, and I'll go into more detail in a bit. But this is just one of my favorite studies by Craig Olson and colleagues, using the Dundee and New Zealand longitudinal study from birth up until, I think they're in their 40s now, but really identifying what are those factors that predict how you turn out as an adult. And what we know in childhood, it's a lot about social connectedness, feeling a part of a group, having pro-social or helpful cooperative behavior. In adolescence, it's your attachments, it's participating in activities, and competence, as well as life satisfaction, that really lead to your adult well-being. So this is often what we're trying to figure out. How do we learn about those things that we can make a difference? So the MDI, just briefly, it is just to explain, it is a measure of child well-being and developmental assets during the middle childhood years, both inside and outside of school. It's a self-report survey, so children complete it. It's strengths-based, so we really focus on those factors through looking at the literature, really the empirical literature and theory over the last couple of decades. What are those factors that link to health, well-being, success, and social emotional development, both inside and outside of school? Just the MDI is completed online. So we'll say students go to a computer lab or on iPads and complete it. 4th graders, it usually takes them about a class period or a class period and a half. 7th graders, it takes about 30 minutes to complete. In total. It was developed through a collaborative process. So one thing that was really great about the MDI is we decided that we would bring in the scientific experts, but right from the very beginning to figure out what should we measure, what should we focus on. We brought in educators, children, community members, teacher unions. We got so much feedback all along the way of what should be included, what were the ways we were asking the questions, always balancing that idea of the practical information that communities and schools wanted alongside the sort of recent scientific research, particularly in the field of resiliency is where we drew a lot of the work, as well as child development and health as well. So it's really a population level measure. So it's used to support policy, program, and practices at a universal level. It's not an individual diagnostic tool. So it doesn't like you get a low score on the MDI and then you then get identified. And I'll talk more. So really universal approach, really focusing on development of the whole child, like the physical health, nutrition and sleep, school, as well outside of school, family, community, really looking at them across multiple contexts. So we look at children's experiences in schools, families, neighborhoods, as well as after school time. Why are we measuring this in middle childhood? Well, we find that, we know a lot about the real early years and kindergarten now with the EDI, and adolescence is another area where there's a lot of data on the problems of adolescence, but middle childhood seemed to be this kind of left out of the picture, where we had very relatively little data on the children's social emotional lives in particular, but even after school time during this critical developmental period. And I would really argue that middle childhood, this age, especially between the ages of 9 and 12, is a time where there's dramatic changes in children's development cognitively, socially, their peer relationships, academically, physically, biology, puberty. In fact, some would argue that, in fact, this middle childhood period has more changes that occur in such a short time period than in any other time in the life cycle. Perhaps, Neil, I'd love to talk with you about that. Perhaps the first year of life, but again, in rather relatively short time, especially now all that we're knowing about brain plasticity, it is one of these periods of development in which there's huge dramatic changes occurring in the brain as well. And so we sort of position it as this real time of transition link turning points, which colleagues have called this idea of you can either sort of go on this path toward risk or on resiliency. So if we can find out how they're doing, then we can do something about it and intervene. We also know through recent science that these social and emotional skills in particular, things like empathy, pro-social behavior, satisfaction, and the like, that these can be taught, that they are malleable. And that really has come from the science on neuroplasticity. Recent work really showing us the brain is much more plastic and malleable than previously thought. And the other thing, and I'd love to, if anyone asks me a question about this, is that we also really highlight the idea that we're learning from the children, that we're incorporating their voices. And, some people, and this would be one of the things that people bring up is, can we get reliable and valid information from children in fourth grade? And I would say yes. But I think we owe it to children and the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. That's how we frame the MDIs. It really is, they have the right to give their opinion and be listened to by the adults around them. So when we began the MDI, and we still do to this day, we go to the students, or we tell the teachers, to the children and say, you are our teachers. If we want to help build a better world for children, we need to learn from you. And, we don't want to rely on others because you have your own opinion, and we can work forward. At the heart, I would say, we have many dimensions of the MDI, but the one thing that seems to be most sticky and resonant is this focus on the relationships are central. And we know this from health literature on social support. But this is really a critical aspect where we ask about relationships. Just a quote that I actually love, and I use it so many times, is that from Yuri Bronfenbrenner, another one from Yuri, that every child requires someone in his or her life who's absolutely crazy about them. So this idea of having a focus on relationships is key. Also at the Center on the Developing Child, that research on resiliency really finds that every child who ends up doing well has had at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive adult. And I want to say this because we've actually found data that extends this a bit. So I'll keep that. You're waiting for that. So the MDI has 5 dimensions, kind of like the EDI, I guess. I don't know. I remember when we were developing it with Clyde Hertzman, we just decided to go with 5. And so The focus, I'm just moving this over, the focus is really about measuring social and emotional development, physical health and well-being, connectedness to adults and peers, school experiences, and use of after school time. And I'll just show you a bit about those. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but just to give you a sense of some of them. So the social and emotional development, we do have additional ones for the 7th grade MDI for the older kids, but we look at a range of aspects, from optimism to happiness to empathy, and also absence. We call it absence of sadness and worries, just because we wanted to make it strengths-based. So we also look at things like anxiety and depression. We look at self-regulation and perseverance, as well as self-awareness. So these all align with the SEL things, just so you know. We look at physical health, well-being, things like general health, eating breakfast, meals with adults at home, sleep and body image. We look at adults at school, connectedness, how much are the children connected with adults at school, in the neighborhood, at home, their sense of connectedness to peers and having a friend, as well as important adults at school. We look at after school time, and including lessons and activities, youth organizations, music or arts, how they spend their time, who they're with. I mean, we ask all their leisure time activities, and then we ask them what are their wishes for how they want to spend after school time. And that's really cool, because we get lots of, we have data on so many wishes right now. And I'll let you guess, well, we'll come up and I'll tell you what the majority of them wish for. We look at school experiences, including school climate, motivation, bullying and victimization as well. So a number of those things. And then we created an index of well-being that combines these 5 different components, where we get to organize basically what percentage of children are in the thriving range. And I'm not going to go into the details of how we determine the cutoffs. We have lots of articles describing that, but we looked at thriving, medium to high well-being, and low well-being. So you can look at children over time on these 3 dimensions. And then we really created the assets. And this is a really important aspect of the MDI that's different than the EDI, is what we went, we culled the research on resiliency, trying to find out what are those differences that make a difference and that are actionable, that you could do something about. And so we added these assets where you look at things like nutrition and sleep, connectedness, as well as peer belonging and organized activities. So we identified these 4 different assets. So we can map these by community, by school, and you could see where are the kids thriving, where they have strong assets, and also where are the assets relatively low. And what we've found over the years is that there's a significant relationship between the number of assets you have and your well-being. So children, so just so you know, and our data have confirmed this, is that the more assets children have, the higher percentage of children are thriving. So this just shows you that linear relationship between assets. Just to give you a bit of a context of BC, we have a new education curriculum that includes, that's K to 12. We have one curriculum that really brings in the social and emotional learning. So we have thinking, communication, and then personal and social competency. So in the British Columbia context, we've really made a connection between this new curriculum and the MDI. So we're able to report out on each of those dimensions for our curriculum. And also, of any of you who are interested in the social emotional learning, or I know schools take that up, we, on the MDI, are all 5 dimensions of SEL that were identified by Castle. So we align with that as well. The other thing I do want to say, so we've spent the last decade, like the MDI, the first pilot took place in 2010. So it's relatively new. I guess it's 2019. So it's almost a decade. That seems kind of weird because it seems relatively new, but we really, really spent a lot of time before going wide to make sure we had valid and reliable data, and how the measures were determined. Just, you know, most of our measures are not ones we created new. We actually, again, culled the literature and the recent science and the best measures and crafted together the tool based on these other measures. So we've had a number of publications. I think to date we have about 10 peer-refereed publications for the MDI, which it's small, relatively small compared to the EDI, but we're we're growing. So we have validation studies, supportive adult studies, linking it to social and emotional learning. And we also have research linking the EDI to the MDI. So we've done linkage to show how does the EDI actually predict some of the aspects on the MDI, which is really great because it really shows both the validity of the EDI and the MDI by showing that these teacher-rated social emotional competencies predict self-rated well-being as well in MDI. In British Columbia, we've been growing. Starting we don't have provincial coverage. We don't have, our funding is school district by school district. And so we've been able to capture a lot. Last year, we had data from almost 30,000, and to date we have in BC have data on over 100,000 students. We are also rolling out the MDI across Canada with a project that's a national rollout project showing that, and that's just growing as well. The MDI, so just to really, again, I want to put the focus back here, and we're measuring, and so we're researchers, we're at a university, but really what's important is that the data get out to the people who can make a difference in children's lives. That's, number one priority. How do we get these data to, because we promised the kids that we get them, they're our teachers, we're gonna use this data. So we have worked really intensely on ways to report the data in to stakeholders in user-friendly ways. So we now have, so first of all, every school that participates in the MDI gets a school report of just their data for their students, not individual level data, but as a summary, and I'll show you some of those. So they get these data, and because we've automated this system where you can go online and do it, these reports can be done relatively quickly in a matter of weeks, actually. These are all online, and they're not shared publicly. Just that's the way we do it in BC. They're not shared publicly. We then have the school reports, as you see here, and we have school board community reports, and these actually summarize across an entire district the results, as well as across neighborhoods. So we map students' data by where they live, their postal code. So we have maps, and I'll be showing some of those, and we have a technical guide if anyone's interested in that. So MDI, and I'm going to share with you some of the examples of some of the data, but MDI data can provide a way to understand students' perspectives about their lives outside of school. It's very interesting. Some people, having done it, are like, well, I don't agree with what the kids are saying, and I'm like, well, these kids, this is the kids, they're saying this, So maybe you need to dig deeper into it. It can catalyze discussions about students' connectedness to adults in school, and I'll talk about that. Focus on a comprehensive school health plan to really see about sleep and nutrition. Monitor change, to see over time to see if your efforts are working. Just as a note, I do a lot of research and evaluations of school-based interventions, and so almost all of the measures on the MDI have been used in my evaluations and really show sensitive to change over time. So, it's again another critical aspect if you're looking at interventions and support or prevention opportunities. And it could be really a way, I will say, and this is something I'd love to have more discussion about, is a way to, I'm doing this, is a way to bring community and schools to talk together, because it's about all of our children in a community. So we have seen times where the school has their efforts on after school time, and then the community has their efforts on after school time. And here's this MDI data about all the kids in that neighborhood. And now finally the community and the school come together to say, how could we collaborate more to talk about how it's all of our children in these neighborhoods. So we've seen it being used by, social planning, and but really to instigate that interaction that is a road not always traveled well. So here's some key strategies and findings I'm going to show. So you can examine differences in students' social emotional competence across multiple dimensions. So in our reports, for example, we show high, medium, and low. So we've categorized, the green is the thriving, medium, and we've been able to categorize this. And then the black bar that you see is, for example, this is from a school district, from a school I think this is school district, and it compare you to how are all the other school districts. So you get to see the black line shows you, are you on par? Are you above? Are you below? So we look at, like you could see right away, this school district really high on empathy, not so much on pro-social behavior. Or here's self-esteem, absence of worries. This absence of worries is a really interesting one because you see the red bar means that there's a lot of kids who have worries. So you could right away do a glance and see how your kids are doing socially and emotionally on different things, as well as self-regulation and responsible decision making. So I'm just going to use fast just to give you a snapshot of how we present the data and how they can be so convey so much in just very snapshots. You can look at well-being in grade 4 and 7 at the population level. So here, for example, we have all the grade 4s who participated last year in the MDI, that 42%, on average 40%, 2% were thriving, 25% medium, 33%, which is very interesting, very aligned with the EDI results we have. Whereas grade 7, you find that 38% are thriving, 27% are medium, 35%. So, and just this decrease from well-being from between 4 and 7 is kind of a common factor where you see well-being decreasing across those developmental periods as well. Here is just a map. So this is Vancouver. If no one's been to Vancouver, this is what it looks like. And what you see here are all the neighborhoods across Vancouver. And so we do GIS mapping to map well-being. So darker, higher proportion of students in that neighborhood who are doing well, of thriving, versus lighter colors, lower well-being. So here in a snapshot, again, you can look at comparatively the well-being. And just so you know, you do see a bit of a social gradient. Our west side of Vancouver is more wealthy versus our east side. So you see some of that, but then you see, an area like West Point Grey, as you see here, it's a lighter color of well-being, and yet that's a very affluent area. Again, a kind of interesting factor. And then you could look at change over time, where you could see how neighborhoods change in the proportion of children doing well over time. So this just shows you Vancouver again. And you can monitor children's well-being over time. So here's just a map of 4th graders over the years since we began the MDI in terms of as a population, have we seen decreases, as you see here, in thriving and well-being for 4th grade, and you see the same pattern in 7th grade as well. So we could actually look at those trends of decreasing thriving and identify what's happening, both in the communities, the society, larger things. You can also examine assets at the population level. So here, just so you know, we use this again, trying to think of knowledge translation and how do you communicate this information. We early on developed a metaphor of the richness of the soil. So when we map our assets or communicate about our assets, if it's a darker brown, it means that more of that asset is prevalent, more kids have that asset, versus a lighter brown, it means that it's kind of like the desert, not really existing. So we use that metaphor, again, thinking about knowledge translation, how do you communicate that? So you can see here the assets, and we break it down into the square where for 4th grades, all participating, 83% reported positive adult relationships, 84% positive peer relationships, 86 after school. This is for 4th grade, and 66 for nutrition and sleep. And you see both for, you see a difference between the adult relationships for the grade 7s, which is, again, something I could talk more about. But you see the nutrition and sleep is kind of where we see the least amount of assets. And again, we can map these. So here's adult relationships across all of Vancouver by neighborhood. Where are the neighborhoods that have that students report high proportion of positive adult relationships with adults at home, at school, and in the community? And here you can see, again, monitor change over time. I have to say, it was very interesting about this adult relationships. This was a huge eye-opener for many educators and community members who couldn't believe that kids had such low connectedness to adults, and especially in these communities. And so there was a real effort. This map sparked all this discussion and action on adult relationships. And as you see, the map changed over a couple of years in terms of not being so many light colored ones and having deeper ones. And, it's amazing how just a map could spark this change. And again, you see nutrition and sleep you can really see the gradient here in terms of socioeconomic status. The right side is the east side, lower SES, left side, higher SES. But again, you see a change over time where it's decreasing amounts of low colors. Peer relationships, again, we can map these, and then you again can look at the neighborhoods in this way, as well as after school activities. This is really interesting, you know, because community planners to say, okay, where are the efforts happening for after school time? Where are there a number of kids who are not participating as much? And then you could look at, see what can we do about it to create greater equality and equity in terms of access to after school time. Again, these kinds of maps. So for example, this is a great example of a community, Burnaby School District 41. They spend a lot of time working with their community on after school time. So when they first saw their map, this is Burnaby, British Columbia, really close to Vancouver, they saw a lot of inequity. So you see here very much the darker colors are the ones where there's a greater proportion of students in after school time, and the lighter sections are less of a degree. So here you see great inequality in terms of access or support or participation. They took it very seriously. So you see this next time they did their MDI, there's less inequality. There's more participation, higher levels of participation in after school activities. And finally, they basically created equity across the entire school district and all the neighborhoods where there was an equal proportion of students participating in after school activities. So this just shows you a dramatic shift that can occur and how putting effort on something that you can monitor this change to see at the universal population level. We can also examine children's connectedness to schools, and this is I mentioned the adults and the importance of adults, and decades of research have just shown the importance of having an important adult in your life, be it a teacher, be it someone at school. So one of the questions that we ask on the MDI is, are there any adults at school who are important to you? It's a simple question. It's been used in other studies, and kids can report either no one, or they can say how many, and they basically have to put their initials. So, and just so you know, we basically have found over the years that kids who say they have no one at their school who's important to them are lowest on every dimension of well-being, every dimension of social emotional competence. Those students who say they have at least one adult, they're higher. But we found that 2 and above, 2 or more adults, you actually are rocking it. Like, you really are doing well in terms of every dimension, and I don't know if it's like having one and a spare, if it's like someone's gone that day, you have the other one, or what it is, but we find this consistent pattern for 4th grade and 7th grade, especially around self-concept. So the significant difference is staircase. And so we then started grouping according to, this is our infographic. So a school will get this report, a school district, this is across all the places participating last year, that 4th graders said they had 76% said they had 2 or more adults, 9% said 1, 15% said no one. But look at grade 7, what happens. 54%, a little over half, are saying 2 or more, 12%, but a whopping 34% of grade 7th graders are saying there's no adult at this school who's important to me. And I could talk more about this, but it's really important data for schools to get. And here, which is so fascinating, this is just the 4th graders, is the range across schools. You could have a school that has the 4th graders say 50% of the 4th graders say we have 2 or more. 2 schools, and this is the case, where every single student who completes the MDI says there are 2 or more adults at this school. And again, that same range, so this idea of the range across schools is really important to show that it is possible. Like, it isn't like, oh, well, those kids, they don't know what they're talking about. And I could tell you about ways that this has catalyzed so much action, because they feel like we can start making connections to kids, even as much as, really making sure we can say hi to them in the hallway and make sure they're connected. This again shows you that average for 7th grade. Just again, the very wide range across schools. So looking at the average is not enough. I think you have to look at the range as well. So I'm going to just give you a story of one school district. They got their MDI results in 2013, 2014 for their grade 7s. And at Port Alberni, they said, oh my goodness, 53% of our 7th graders, they thought they were all doing fine. They thought, oh, we're so connected to our kids. And 53% said, there's not one adult at this school who's important to me. It was shocking. I think it was heart-wrenching. I think there was some, things like that. And so they decided they're really going to put some attention to making sure every student is connected. And so look at what they did. The next year, they increased from 34% to 51% of students reporting there are 2 or more adults, and reducing it by to 38%. And then again, the next year, and growing more and more, so that it just shows you can track these changes over time. You can look at efforts and things like that. And you also can identify children's wishes for physical outdoor activities for after school time. And if you've guessed it, when we ask children, what do you wish to be doing after school? And I'm not going to go through all the details because we ask everything about, are you spending time in sports and things like that? But I'm saying it here, their number one wish consistently across all of these years with hundreds of thousands of kids so far across, is their number one wish is for physical and outdoor activities, 4th grade and 7th grade. They want to be outdoors with their friends, playing sports, doing things, doing something physical. So our perception that somehow kids today, all they care about are their computers or their technology, they don't want to do anything else, is not supported by our data and from what the kids tell us. So just to point that out there. So we ask them, as you see, where they want the activities to be. So we ask them, where do you want it to be? What are your wishes, again, of where it should be? So again, really thinking about getting this really critical information about after school time. Really how groundbreaking to actually ask the kids what they want to be doing. It's kind of novel, I have to say. It's interesting finding very relatively little data beforehand on asking students. So I'm just closing up a bit now. So here's the website for the MDI where we have all of our reports online. We have our national project. We have Discover MDI. Our hopes is that we really can see these data as making a positive difference in children's lives, that our conversations are also research-based and evidence-informed, and we really try and collaborate. It's so important to bring together everyone that has a stake in the well-being of children, which is everyone, can I say, not just people who have children or work with children, and to really help make a sense of children's lives, that it can be used, we can influence so many things from school districts to organizations to strategic plans to community planning. The data have been in use. We've presented data to kids. We actually have a MDI Kids Advisory Committee, I have to say, who give us some input. But from sports organizations, to health agencies, educators, policymakers. We have a online toolkit, a resource called Discover MDI, which has a treasure trove of information about the MDI, workshops, champions. We have we even provide templates for people to do their present their data to stakeholders, lots of ways to connect with others. We have slide decks, as I said. We have lots of things about children's voices. We even have a whole section on doing focus groups with children, because one thing we find is that sometimes the data hopefully it instigates more conversation and more curiosity. So you're like, oh, well, what makes an adult important to kids at school? Or why do they say they wish for outdoor activities? And so ways to connect with kids more. We have a champion network of people who've been using MDI data for several years in their districts and communities and share what they've been doing. Lots of workshop ideas. Actually, it's like everything you want, just go and there's a worksheet already created, like getting them to focus on well-being. So for example, we have things on exploring data worksheets, to questions, small group discussion questions of looking at MDI data, to really always advice on think big, but start small if you're overwhelmed with stuff. There's developing ideas workshops that are amazing for really getting into your data. This is just an example of one school district that now has adopted the MDI and a focus on well-being at the whole district. And so every single school has within its district plan focus on relationships and belonging. And then, so I'm just going to end now, but I guess for me, the MDI, if our focus is on healthy children for the future, we all work together. And I just love this comment by Margaret Mead, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. That was a great introduction to the MDI, and you sort of moved through it pretty quickly, and I think there's lots for us to digest and think about. I think for me, some of what you said that I think is particularly sort of ringing in my ears right now, having just come back from this UNICEF meeting around child-friendly cities and children's rights, is that how important children's voices are, and listening to children and understanding their views and increasingly, if we're going to be helping communities organize themselves to face a very sort of challenging future that we're all facing, and the children are facing in many parts of this country and your country, taking into account what they think, what's important to them, and how they're living their lives, I think is really, really important. This is really a very valuable tool. There's some questions that have come in that are on the Zoom chat, and so and I want to just sort of go to that. One person asked, Shufang Shi asks, where can we learn more about the development and validation of the MDI? And I think that that's all on the MDI website, that all of that is there.
If you want to discover MDI, it's just www.discovermdi.ca. If you just put in research, all the articles, all the published articles and the references are available there.
Right. And then the other question that's asked is, how did you decide on the 4 assets? What strategies these communities to change or improve the MDI, and any studies that report these? So how did you pick your assets? There are lots of assets out there. How did you pick the ones that you did? And then have you really tried, you showed later, I think after he wrote this question, but you did show one of the communities where the MDI was improving over time, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about the assets, and then how, targeted interventions have been developed, and what that process has been.
Right. So the assets really were, like I said, really informed from the recent science and resiliency, and really looking at what were those assets. We did a few different approaches. We first really did a scan of what's available, from the Search Institute assets to the research science, some work by Ann Maston at University of Minnesota on resiliency, and really sort of combed the literature. And then once we identified those, we had our working group, which was really a combined group of scientists, community members, educators, and I have to say, our first study was funded by the United Way of the Lower Mainland. So United Way really had a stake in community focus. And so it was when we went through identifying that we really said, well, we first have to look at adult relationships. That is critical. There's so much research just talking about, supportive adults in children's lives, and the peer relationships at this time period. And, people really felt that it is a time of that. And then really the nutrition and sleep was one that everyone felt like that's something people could do something about. It's of interest to health providers, to school, to parents. And then the after school time, I mean, really, I will say that was a big focus of United Way, to focus on the after school hours and the critical hours. And at the time we were beginning the MDI development, which was about 2007, that really was a focus. And at that time, there was relatively little information about after school time in Canada. So we decided that's how, and then the school experiences, I didn't mention this, but we also have the asset of school experiences that we report out on at the district level, but we don't report on it at the school level, because we worked with, this is another thing important, we worked with unions very closely, teachers unions very closely in the development of the MDI. And again, this was because teachers administer the MDI. So we need the buy-in from teachers to do this. And we needed to have the buy-in from the teachers. So we worked with the union. And one of the things is they said they don't want mapping of the school assets, because that would highlight schools that have anyway. So, and then in using the assets, it really, it has been, really important for people to know where to go, where to start, because sometimes you get your EDI data and you're able to look at that and they're like, how do we know where we should start with the EDI, making policy changes. With the MDI, it really has been where they can look across, like one district looked and said, what stuck out for them, again, a collaborative process of where to start, where to begin, always discussion, in fact, I think the one district, they have it as a standing monthly agenda item, MDI data, where are we, what are we doing? And they decided to focus on after school time. So one thing that they did that was really fascinating was they decided that they were working the district, and they thought that they weren't working in collaboration enough with the community centers that were like down the street from the school. So they decided to get together with the community, the people who run the community centers and after school time with the school, and just collaborate on what kind of offerings they had during the after school hours and help each other offer the programming. So there were just so many ways that really brought together people to have conversations of collaboration and making sure that they were all efforts on the after school time. The nutrition and sleep is another one that was really interesting, because schools sometimes are like, well, what can we do about nutrition and sleep, or the sleep in particular. And one whole school decided they were going to do a whole thing on sleep hygiene and helping kids learn, what are the factors that interfere with their sleep. And they brought in pediatricians, and, so it just was really a way, it gives you a bit of a sense, but how those assets can give you the roadmap in some ways.
Right. And I think a couple points just to reflect on that. I think that there are a number of challenges that children are facing in which there's not necessarily a service that can be provided to them, but that the resources are in the ecosystem in which they're living. The resources are in the community. And it's about changing the patterns in that community and activating the whole community to respond and to innovate together. So one of the things we're trying to do with All Children Thrive is to help cities and communities become sort of micro enterprises of social innovation, realizing that there's lots that they can be doing with their existing resources, some of which have calcified into certain kinds of ways that they act, and just sort of pointing things out like you did with things that are down the street and getting things together can actually make a big difference. Let me turn to one of the other questions that that was asked. One of the other questions, has this tool been tested with children from different cultural backgrounds? And in doing that, have you had to make adjustments in how the tool is being used? The other question that's related is the MDI being used in different countries? If it's being used in different countries, do you allow certain minor modifications of it to sort of make it useful to that country?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, yeah, that's something. Okay, so yes, the MDI. So first of all, the MDI, in terms of the cultural aspect, we have made some changes. So first of all, just to give you a bit of a context of Vancouver, for instance, or Surrey, where we've done a large school district. Surrey, the school district in BC, has 160 languages represented. So we have a very diverse community. We've tested it out with the kids across cultures to look at things. But the biggest issue where we've found so we haven't found huge differences in terms of the context, but what we've had to make changes on over time, and we are adapting it, is our after school time section. Because we realized when we developed it, it was pretty much urban centric. The kinds of activities we asked for, the kind of that. So we've really had to make changes around that, and of course changes in terms of the time and screen time and all those changes. So but let me give you a couple of examples. So for example, right now we're working up in the Northwest Territories and in the Manitoba First Nations school system. So we're working with Indigenous youth, and so we've really tried to change the after school time section. Actually, it's the first time for the Manitoba we used open-ended questions like, what do you do after school? So we actually, that to me, that after school time section is the one in which there's lots of different, that needs to be malleable. It needs to be, and I actually feel that that's the section that really should be developed to be, if you're in a rural area, so it's more malleable. The second piece is so first of all, the MDI has been translated into French, English. Well, it's not translated English, it's in French now because Canada has this bilingual thing. Spanish, so we do have the MDI in Spanish. We did a project a few years ago with World Bank in Peru. So we did do a whole pilot project in Peru using the Spanish version. Across countries, it's now, there's an article, actually, the validity study in Italian. So we have an Italian MDI. There's a German translation that just got completed, and there's groups in Germany. I'm just trying to think UK, which didn't have to be translated, but modified, of course, for that. So we have the UK, we have Croatia. So we do have a small pilot of a research study in Croatia as well. So French, English, Spanish. And I know right now we have a pilot in Israel. It's being translated into Hebrew.
Great. So the data is starting to come in from all these different, and I'm sure you're learning a great deal from that as that is taking place. So that answers one of the other questions. There's some, obviously somebody is on the line here that wants to try a Chinese version. They must be writing in from China or from someplace where Chinese is the native language. Have you moved in that direction yet?
No, but it's very interesting, just given we have a very high proportion of Chinese speakers here in Vancouver in particular. And I know right now, just so you know, our permission form, so we use, no one even asked about this, so we have passive consent. We've been able to get through our IRB, our ethics board. So we really do, to get at the population level, we really need more than 80% of children completing it. And so we send home, I guess, ways that they can sign, parents get the information, and that we have translated into 12 languages, including Chinese. So it would be interesting to think about a Chinese version of this. And just to get back to one of the questions, I do want to say, so what we do when we work with other jurisdictions, there are some, like, to make it the MDI, there are some things that we say, you can't change this. Like, you can't change the well-being index or the things like that, the questions that we ask, because we've worked so many years making the validity reliability. But certainly the demographic page, where we ask children about their first language learned, age. I do want to say, this is just something very interesting. So we, 2 years ago, through our national implementation, and really prodding from Nova Scotia, that has a whole curriculum now focused on gender identity, we no longer ask about gender as a binary construct. So we now are asking all the students in 4th grade and 7th grade how they describe gender, and have multiple options for that as well. And anyway, so those things are the demographics, background, and the after school time are ones when we see much more much more malleable to meet the local context.
So you can customize those in order to make them, adapt to those local contexts.
Right. And we also are talking about modules now. We're just now talking about a business plan. And so we're working, for example, with a endocrinologist who studies diabetes in children, and they have a intervention program in a few communities. And so what we're doing now is they're doing a survey just focused on this program and more digging deeper into the nutrition aspect. And then they're linking it to the MDI so that it could be a way for researchers to add modules and that go deeper into whatever their interests are.
Great, great. I also want to just echo your focus on the middle years or middle childhood. Just a quick anecdote from my end. When we were putting together the life course health development research agenda, and we were trying to get people to write chapters, this before I knew you, it was very hard to find someone to write a chapter on middle childhood. In fact, there was this discussion that early childhood was now 0 to 8, and adolescence had moved down to 10. So that middle childhood was being squeezed out, and that actually toys for middle childhood were being less manufactured, because there was less and less of a market for them. And so we had a real hard time when we got someone, Clyde Hertzman, Tom Boyce wrote the early childhood chapter, Rich Lerner and Claire Brindis and Bob Blum wrote the adolescent chapter, but we were looking for a middle childhood person to write. It was hard for us to do that. We ended up with using a chapter by Marco Del Giudice from University of New Mexico, who's actually an anthropologist that's written a lot about the importance of early childhood, middle childhood rather, and how unrecognized this sort of number of changes that go on that actually are all well underway during middle childhood, that sort of you don't sort of see the full manifestation till adolescence, but are well on their way. So I've developed rather than thinking that it's disappearing, a sort of new appreciation. And so that's why I'm a big supporter of the MDI and trying to sort of move that forward as well, because I think that that'll really help us. We will be looking to post this website, this webinar on our website, and make it available for people that are participating now. You'll be able to go to the lcrn.net website and share this with your colleagues and friends. And Kim said that she'll make her slides available. Excuse me. So we'll be doing that as well. Kim, are there any other things that you want us and others to know that, in terms of your own interest in spreading the word and getting others to use the EDI? This is your paid advertisement,
I love it. Well, I think, I'm going to go back to the idea of how you can use data to catalyze action. And I love the metaphor that I've recently been using, and I can't figure out who to attribute it to. Maybe you do, is really helping use data as a flashlight and not as a hammer. And this idea that the MDI can shed light on things that we haven't seen before, and really instigate conversations that really together we can help build a better world for children. I think that that's one thing. So this idea of how critical it is to get the data out to the people who could make a difference, including the children. And I think that that's an important aspect of that. And we have lots of idea. But the other thing, and this really goes back, Neil, to your work on the life course, is that these data also, and this is where I would love to have visiting professors come to help and spend time using our linked data sets, because if you think about it, you can, with our linked data set, with MDI now linking to YDI, hopefully soon, linking to graduation, linking to employment, linking to juvenile justice, linking to, think of this richness of the ways you can use this data set at a population level to look at all sorts of things to identify those differences that make a difference. What are the factors in early childhood that lead you on a trajectory this way? And are there ways that you can circumvent maybe on a path to risk? Or, and really that idea of using this rich data set to identify some of these critical elements where we could then do interventions to test causal, anyways, it's just such a rich, so, on the one hand, the MDA is about like getting the data out there into the front line, getting them to use the data to make a positive change. But there also is that because we have this linked database, because we could link it to health, because we could link it to education and many other sources, we have this rich data set to really identify these trajectories across the life course. And Neil, maybe, I'm thinking about now as they move into post-secondary and then middle, young adulthood and then middle, anyways, you can see we can follow them up for a long time.
Well, it's interesting because one of my colleagues here, we've just been funded recently by the Maternal and Child Health Bureau for a life course intervention research network. And so we're really trying to bring intervention researchers together. So we have several of my colleagues that are joining this intervention research network are proposing, I think, really interesting novel studies. My colleague here at UCLA, two colleagues here at UCLA, Mitch Long and Rebecca Dudovitz, have been doing stuff in the schools, trying to figure out specifically of how you connect parents and adults to kids using different mechanisms and looking over time the impact that has on mental health and also on drug use. And another colleague here at UCLA, Alice Kuo, has been particularly interested in issues of neurodiversity, and we increasingly have more and more kids coming to university with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, and sort of understanding their process of adaptation within schools and what their connections are and their development over time. So, going beyond the YDI at 15 to the college DI, whatever it's going to be.
We do have to think about that. You bring up a really important point, Neil. I forgot to tell you about one other study. Because what we can also do, because we're doing all this work at the population level, researchers who are doing other projects can link to EDI and MDI data if they get the personal education number. So right now I'm working in collaboration with Michael Kobor, who is a molecular geneticist here at HELP, who's in the Faculty of Medicine. And we're doing an intervention study for 6th and 7th graders using a program called Mind Up, a mindfulness social and emotional learning program. And we're going to, and it's a group of kids who have the EDI and MDI, but we're actually also collecting DNA to look at epigenetic change, to see if there's an epigenetic change as a result of this intervention. But because we're collecting all this data from 6th and 7th graders, because we're getting the data, we can now link it back to like the day they were born and look at we're looking at cortisol too in terms of their stress physiology. So this richness of that data set by having, so much to add with other studies.
Well, and what I think is really important that you're doing, Kim, is I keep mentioning to people here in California, and then at the meeting I was just at in Jacksonville, when people talk about data and they say, well, you have the EDI, so you can do certain things, and people talk about what they're able to do, and I then say, well, there's now the MDI, and there's this whole data set that's being developed, and then Vancouver actually has the data system of the future for children. It actually exists. It's been built already. And so it's not a pie in the sky, well, that would be impossible to do. It's actually there and being used in very creative ways so that cities all over the world could be moving in this direction. And so I think the more that we can get the word out and sort of help you move both your research and intervention programs forward, to inspire the rest of us that, we don't have to be using late 20th century, our abacus and various adding machines that we're using still to measure what's going on with kids. And but to use these, new measures and link them and tie them together so that we actually can shine a light on what needs to be done, and help children shine a light on that so that they can own the data and they can be activated, engaged, and play a major role in sort of moving the kind of changes that we need to see, because God knows that they really want to be involved with creating a better place, better world, a better future for themselves and being global citizens. And I think you're creating the kind of data set that will help people sort of see themselves as global citizens and be able to sort of be masters of their own life course at some point, which is, I think, what we're hoping to achieve. So I'm just so grateful that you're doing the work there, and just awe-inspired by what you're doing. So anything we can do to help and move that forward, we're all there to do that with you. So again, thanks so much for just extraordinary work that you're doing, and being willing to share that with us. And we'll get all this out to whatever networks we can moving this forward. So
and I just say thank you so much. So well said. And really thank you for all the kudos. And I just have to say, we're so open to collaboration. I feel, again, that we go so much further ahead when we work together versus separate silos. So I really encourage that. And if there's anybody who wants to contact me directly, I think you can go right to my website, or it's Kimberly.Schonert-Reichl@ubc.ca, or just Google Schonert-Reichl at UBC. You'll find me, and please feel free to contact me if you have any further questions.
Great.
Okay.
Well, and that sort of brings us to the end of this webinar. And I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Again, it will be posted on our website so that it's available for you to share with others. I want to thank Kim again for just a terrific presentation. And please stay tuned. The next webinar in the series will be not in June, but will be coming later in July, and we have two more, I believe, in the series. The next one is going to focus on how data is being used in communities, and we'll have some folks from HELP and some folks from UCLA that'll be co-organizing that one, and we'll have one or two more after that. So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks to Kim, and we'll sign off and say goodbye.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been
All
such
right, take care.
Thank you. You too.